So, good evening, everyone. In this special supervision session here at Aephoria. And today we are really just in conversation in many ways around the transforming stage of consciousness, with David Skibbins offering some of who he is as a human being into that conversation. It's so interesting because there is so little out there about the later stages of consciousness and the later stages of maturity and what it is like to be there and move through there. And so part of our intention with today is to support adult development practitioners, coaches to make sense of that stage of consciousness, stage of maturity more. And at the same time, it is to do that through the context of who David is, and more particularly, some of the amazing things that he's been busy with. So David said I should introduce him by saying this is David Skibbins, which of course is about this much of what I could say. But let me say one or two things that I really love and appreciate about David. The one thing I really adore about David is the fact that one of the things that he enjoys most in coaching is when the conversation gets so infuriating that it makes him and maybe even whoever he's in the room with, coach or client, frustrated and get that point of like, oh, damn it. So I really love that that's the edge that he works with in his work personally, but also in his coaching work. David is a psychotherapist, a coach supervisor, a writer of mystery novels, a lover of the tarot, an overall wonderful human being, and a wonderful, wonderful Dungeons and Dragons player, but also a dungeon master. So many wonderful things that David's done, and who he is in the world is even more spectacular than that. So, David, that's the introduction you get. Anything that you would like to just add to the conversation as we get started today?
You dirty rat. I can't believe it's like I'm here. I'm like looking forward to sharing whatever I share, and then you play Nisa Dorma and I'm bawling, just crying away. And I'm like at that moment where, okay, I have the persona that I'm supposed to present to this, and yet I can't keep my eyes open because the music is just so beautiful. It's like I have to surrender to it.
Mm, mm, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And what a gift that is for all of us when we can find the parts in us that surrender to the beauty of music
Mhm.
and the beauty of also, I think, the transcultural um, representation of that
Oh,
particular
yeah.
piece of music.
Oh my God, that was awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Whew.
So one or two things just up front, little bit of housekeeping, then we're getting into the conversation very quickly. And so the pieces of housekeeping that I have been asked to bring to the group by Charisse, that normally does this piece, is the following. So the first thing is, if you are joining us today for the first time, welcome to the Aephoria Supervision Space. If you would like to experience our Enneagram and stage assessment as a coach, we offer some of those for free. So just email us at hello@aephoria.co.za and ask for a link as a coach from supervision. And if you want to know more about us, go to aephoriagroup.com. And then upcoming trainings that we have left for this part of the year. Of course, many trainings in 2025, but we have an introduction to the Enneagram training, 4 online sessions of 4 hours each, working for Africa, Europe, North America, and South America between 5 and 30 November. And similarly, one on the stages of adult development, of maturity, 4 4-hour sessions between 19 and 28 November, also working mostly for Africa, Europe, North America, and South America in terms of time zones. So yeah, let us know if you want to know more about that, but all of that's on the website. And then what I thought I'd just add in here is just a quick piece around the stages of maturity, and what we're talking into. So we're not going to teach a lot about the stages. We're really just going to experience some of the later or post-conventional stages through the conversation. Now, we know that the early stages of maturity, self-protecting, conforming, specializing, and performing, are what we call conventional stages of maturity, where the way in which I meet my context is from the place of defending myself against what is upsetting my sense of who I am in the world. I'm kind of hustling in a big way for my self-esteem, and I'm within the norm. I'm within the general norms in different ways, either by defending my own needs, the self-protecting phase, by defending myself and my membership to a group and my groups that I belong to through my group identity, the conforming stage, through my craft or technical or specializing knowledge in the specializing stage, and through my capacity to make things happen, to create outputs, to yeah, perform in different ways according to the expectations. Those are the conforming stages, or the conventional stages of maturity. And roughly 80% of our adult lives we spend in those stages. And then we get the post-conventional stages where we try to balance ourselves, our sense of our identity, and our identity becomes more multiple. The internalizing stage where I balance myself through my inner world, and from an Enneagram perspective, coming to grips with all the parts of myself that I've avoided. So as a 9, maybe I get a bit more angry and more integrate more with chaos and destabilizing of the system. As an Enneagram 8, I internalize and come to grips with vulnerability and weakness and having other people have their hands on my steering wheel. And then in the strategizing phase, I balance myself through my ability to see systems and act in an agentic way into these systems, from the mountaintop, from the balcony, not from on the dance floor. And so generally when we teach this, we say about 12, maybe 15% of people hang out in the internalizing stage, about 5% in the strategizing stage. And so if you do the math, we're left with 2 to 3% in these later stages. And the transforming stage is the place where I am balancing who I am in the world through being me and through bringing the gift of who I am as an alchemical agent into the world. And at the being stage, I want to transcend all kinds of models, frameworks, language, all ways that disintermediate me and my direct experience of the world. And so that's part of the context that we are going to be having this conversation in. And that's more than enough
But you know,
for
it's
now.
not, I mean, I know that you call it stages, but it's
Yeah.
more like veils. It's
Mm,
like when you're in the self-preservation stage, everything is veiled except for your own self-preservation. And then when you move to the next, you like incorporate everything you've learned in self-preservation, but you see a little bit more. And then as you keep going up the stage, you keep seeing more and more. But I mean, I can be self-pres, I can be, I can be anything prior to this moment. Just ask my wife. She's be glad to show you many examples of what that's like. So it's not like, oh, you step through the doorway and you never go back home again. It's just like you see a little bit more of the context of who you are.
mm, mm. I love the idea of veils.
Hmm.
And yes, I think sometimes when we work with this idea of stages, it's like, oh, okay, I've moved into a new house. And now I live in this new house, and it's not
Right.
like this at all. It's like my
No.
range expanding, I'm fluid, I have momentary fallbacks, I have more long-term fallbacks,
Mhm,
and I
mhm.
have other experiences
Oh,
that take me beyond the veil.
and you see it all at the same time. It's like in a moment of like say conflict, you can see all the different reactions that you can have from all those. I mean, you don't see it in terms of all those stages, but if I were to describe it, I can see all kinds of options that open up to me based on previous forms of development, and then try and where I am now, and then kind of choose from that palette where to go.
Mm, mm, mm. So, I mean, if you had to just maybe share a little bit more of your own just lived experience of what life is like, given which veils have been lifted and that capacity to see the options available for yourself. Um, yeah, what's it like to be David at this stage of your life, in the fourth
Well,
quarter of your life?
yeah, really, heading towards the Western Gate. Um, it's very humbling. Um, and it's like, uh, it's funny because I look at like the work I'm doing on the Tao Te Ching, and I can look at it through the perspective of a more conventional perspective and go, this has to be the most arrogant human being that ever walked the face of the earth. What is he doing messing around with a document that's 2,500 years old and deciding that he knows a better way to organize it and translate it? And I can see that that's a voice in the choir there. But it's like, I don't know. I just have to do it. It's not, it's really not arrogance. It's just kind of like I feel like I'm taking dictation in my life. I feel like I'm taking dictation. It's like I just kind of wait for the right thing to do and do it and hope that it works and then take responsibility for the consequences of it. But there's much less strategizing going on. Much less of, okay, I want to get from point A to point B, and so I'll go just like do this and this and this in order to do it. And much more of, okay, I want to get to point A to point B. It's in your hands, dude. And then just relaxing.
Mm, mm, mm. So, I think before we talk a little bit about what you've been doing with the Tao Te Ching, maybe a little bit of the backstory.
How I
Um,
got there, yeah.
how did you get to start doing what you've been doing with
Okay.
the Tao Te Ching?
Okay.
And then let's share more about the project, maybe.
Right. Okay. I mean, it goes back to I first translated the Tao Te Ching on a Mac, on the little tiny Mac that was like that big, that was many years ago, um, and have loved that book ever since, and uh, lived a rich and interesting life, and did all those things that you described in my introduction. Um, And then I was 74, and my wife came walking up the stairs and said, "How would you like to go on a vision quest to South Africa?" And I said, "I'm going." Um, and there was like no question in my mind. It's like, and I am not the kind of automatic acceptor of the world. I mean, my usual style is a bit resistance in terms of flying halfway across the globe and doing something. But it's like I knew it was exactly right to do. So on my 75th birthday, I stepped outside the sacred circle of on a hillside in South Africa and walked into the up the hill to a giant boulder to spend 3.5 days without food and with just a tarp over myself when it rained, and for to have a vision quest. And about halfway through, I went, oh man, this is going to be a real disaster because I'm going to come back and tell the group my vision was nothing happened. It was just so fucking boring. I can't believe it. I just like sat there forever. And then I did have a vision, and some words clearly came to me from someplace else, which were that we've been asking the wrong questions. The questions that we need to be asking is, how will you save the world? How will you love everything? What truth do you need to speak regardless of the consequences? And where are you going next? Who are you taking with you? And who are you leaving behind? And then right after that, these words came: know that you will lose, know that it will not be enough, do it anyway. Do it for the sake of those that come later who may succeed, and do it to live your truth. That is enough. And I've been living those words ever since in everything I do.
Mm. Mm.
So that's how I got to translating the Tao Te Ching, because it's just like, how am I going to save the world? I mean, nobody needs another book, you know, and I'm not a politician, and God knows I don't know that politicians can save the world. And I can see clearly, especially thanks to Daniel Schmuckenberger, who actually did this whole series of talks about what's coming down the pike towards us. I can see really clearly that we're heading towards just colossal, or already in colossal disasters, ecologically, politically, morally. And so then I just one day said, I need to retranslate the Tao Te Ching from this perspective, because I understand something that I didn't understand before. So I created it for our children's children, to help them through the god-awful disasters they're going to be living through.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and yeah, actually, it was 4.5 days you were without food, not three and
Oh,
a half.
it was
But
forever.
for a self, for an Enneagram 9, it was forever. Um,
Yeah.
just as part of the context. But um, I mean, David, those are big questions. How am I going to save the world, knowing that I'm bound to fail and do it anyway?
Mhm.
And some of those other questions too. How do I love everything? And I know that's a question that's been in many ways walking with me and haunting me, and maybe a little bit like a Japanese koan. How do I
Mhm.
love everything, including a whole lot of things like delusion, greed,
Donald
and
Trump,
yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead, like.
So there's a lot of power in those questions, and it led you to the Tao Te Ching. I'm not sure that everyone here is necessarily familiar with the Tao Te Ching. So what is it for people from a very different part of the world? I mean, there's quite a lot of people here from South Africa, for example, on the call. I'm not sure that the Tao features very much in the multiple cultures that we represent.
2,500 years ago, here's how the story goes. 2,500 years ago, there was a man who was a librarian and record keeper and keeper of ancient texts in civilization in China, in a fairly corrupt empire that he lived in. And finally, he just had enough. And he just knew that he couldn't stand living in this corrupt world anymore. And he decided to leave the kingdom. And so as he was leaving, he got to the Western Gate, which is the last gate before he could head out into the wilderness. And there was a gatekeeper at that gate who stopped him and said, okay, before you leave, we have to capture all of your wisdom. And so he sat him down, and for months, uh, the Lao Tzu, on long strips of paper, made the pictograms of his core teachings, and then he handed them to the gatekeeper and walked off into the wilderness. So goes the story. And that collection of teachings that he had is called the Tao Te Ching. Um, and it is a teaching on how to be in a direct relationship with non-conceptual reality.
And you've already said that you've had a long relationship with the Tao Te Ching. What's
Yes.
what's that relationship been like? And how has the Tao in different phases of your life spoken to you or not spoken to you?
Well, when I first encountered it, it was with Guy Feng and Jane English's beautiful translation of it, including Jane English's black and white photography. That was, I was just a young kid, and it was so moving to me. And I knew that it was true, uh, and that was enough. But it was also amazingly esoteric and confusing, and the language was convoluted, and Lao Tzu loves paradox, and so I couldn't understand it, but I knew it was true. Um, and this is the part where you get to, oh, the conceptual, the conventional part of me goes, how can you say what you're about to say? You have no right to do that. I'm just watching that little veil inside of me kind of light up. I, I I know what he's talking about now. Um, and it sounds terribly arrogant to say that because you're not supposed to, because you're supposed to be humble and nice and be a nine, and you're not supposed to say, "Oh, you understand what Lao Tzu is talking about." But I think I do, and I want to make it accessible to people in South Africa that have never even thought about the Tao before or heard about it as some weird Chinese text that didn't make any sense.
Mm,
Um,
mm. So there's a question in the chat from Andrea who asks, what is non-conceptual reality? Please help.
well, there was the Big Bang, and out of the Big Bang came all the stars and all the planets and time and space, and all that stuff sort of originated out of the Big Bang. Okay, so Lao Tzu says the Tao is what was there before the Big Bang, before time, before space, before history, before matter, before vibration, before frequency, before anything. That there's this fabric to existence that we can't directly perceive because it is so fundamental that we can't see it. Because in order to see it, we're using all those things that were created out of it. Um, and we can't even understand it because understanding is just part of the Big Bang. It's part of all the things that were created out of the moment of creation. But we can perceive it. And when we do, we perceive something that is so fundamental that there's a tremendous amount of peace in it.
Mm, mm, mm. And so the way you've been translating the Tao Te Ching over the last year or so, um, maybe if you want to share a little bit more about how you've approached this, but also what the gift of this is, what the hope is that you offer with this. Why the Tao in these times of climate collapse, in these points of transition. Hmm,
Well, it's like here's the reality. Um, or at least one way to see it, which is we don't have a lot of choices. We can either accept the absurdity of the universe, that life is fundamentally an element of chance, that there is no deeper meaning other than the unfolding of what's around us, and that there is no God, and anything that we try to do to create a God inside our head is ridiculous. And if you don't believe that, just look around at the nature of man and what they're creating in this world. And that sort of hard rock existential truth seems to be the only option that we have. Um, and I would say that Lao Tzu presents us with another way of perceiving the universe and the unfolding of the universe that isn't ridiculously optimistic. It isn't sentimental, but it isn't absurdist and the belief in entropy and the end of everything. It's something else, which is this is like part of a vast experiment, and we are incapable of knowing what it's about, why it's happening, whether or not we're going to be a vital part of it, or whether we're going to blow up the planet. We don't have any idea. And we can't have any idea. We can't really understand it because our brains aren't big enough to understand it. And we'll never be able to understand it. It's not like we'll get to the point where we're finally gods. No, we can destroy the planet. We're gods in that regard. But this planet isn't really all that important in terms of the unfolding of the universe. It's just another planet. Um, What was the question again? Oh,
Well, maybe what would be useful is maybe what I can offer is having had a sneak peek at the book as it moves towards its eventual publication, is what you've done so beautifully is you've translated some of the verses from the Tao Te Ching, not just into and offered a poetic language, the poetic language that is so inherently part of it. But then there's like David's transcription into the language that all of us can work with. Because a lot of the Tao Te Ching that I've encountered before has been about the pathless path, and I don't know what that really means. And then you offer these really beautiful, here's like maybe what it means through a lens in language that humans can understand, um, or at least engage with. And then to offer from there some practices or some tasks or contemplations or things to do with this verse, which
mhm.
for me like really brings it alive in such a beautiful way within the context of climate collapse and the times that we are in, as part of the task of waking up from the delusion that everything's going to be okay and nothing's actually changing when so much is. um
Uh, what Marla and I, my wife, have been doing every morning is like reading one of the chapters from the book. And the chapter that we read today, I'd love to like read some of it for you because it was
yes, please.
totally apropos to the transformative stage of development as well as to what this book is about. So it is number 41, which I call a long, strange trip. Some folks hear about the Tao and walk that path for the rest of their lives. Some folks hear about the Tao and think about it every now and then. Some folks hear about the Tao and crack up with boisterous, contemptuous laughter. Oh, by the way, I was describing my book to somebody that we had over for dinner last night, and he was kind of like in that third group, which is like, I don't deal with spiritual stuff. I was a Catholic, and I think it's all stupid. That laughter seems to pop up whenever anyone tries to describe the Tao. And no wonder. It's not a simple or logical path to walk. What should be clear is obscure. The further you go into it, the more childish you become. The longer you walk the path, the rougher it gets. What you used to consider virtue now seems empty. You cannot aim for purity now that you know that everything is gray. The structures of morality that you used to rely on no longer seem complete. Forms morph, and what was once clear and straight edge now softens. The older you get, the less you know and the wiser you are. You begin to hear the subtle music of the universe that no one else can hear. You begin to see patterns that seem nonsensical to others. You feel a fullness, a richness, and open to experience that is the gift of seeking the nameless. So like and more traditional approaches are like the bright path seems dim, the vastness seems imperfect, the greatest purity is uncleanliness, the purest light seems stained, the perfect square has no corners. And like I kind of tried to morph all that into a language that is saying the same thing in a way that we can access it.
So if
And so
you,
I gathered together like 9, actually 10 different translations of the Tao. And with each chapter, I would sit down and look at all of, oh, I have 5 notebooks full of notes that I took on each one's work on each chapter. And then sat with all of that information so I could see 9 different people looking at this chapter. And then through all that, sort of synthesize what I thought was the truth that was emerging from that.
mm.
You can
And so
see I
if you
have a
just
hard
work
time
with
saying
that,
the truth,
the
It's like,
truth,
oh, you're not supposed to talk about the truth.
is that a
Talk
small
about,
t truth or a capital T truth
yeah.
or both?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at that verse that you just read for us, and yeah, I absolutely love how it connects into the this conversation in big ways. But for you, as you just engage with us here in the moment, what's your sense of what that has to say to the time that we are in? And if that were an invitation or a practice for us in this time where we need to wake up from the delusion that everything's going to be okay, what's your sense of what that verse offers?
Well, you need to break your heart open because the suffering that we've experienced as a species is going to be minor league compared to the suffering that we're going to be experiencing as a species. And that's that I feel whenever I sort of reach down into it, I can feel it in my heart. The incredible pain of destroying our nest and what that's going to do, and the incredible pain of losing ourselves in a virtual reality that has no true connection with another human being, and just the pain of it all. And so I think if you're gonna go down into that in order to see where we are, we first of all you have to know that nothing you do is going to make any difference, and you have to embrace that instead of being paralyzed around that, or going into depression or going into denial. And you have to go, it's okay that nothing I do is going to make any difference. I I love it anyway. And so it makes you really love the present moment you're in. I mean, I'm looking out my window at a tree that is losing its leaves through the winter, and then those leaves will come back in the summer. We have to love the world that we're in, that we know much of it is going to be destroyed or altered or changed over the next 100 years. And you have to do what you can, but you also have to embrace that it won't be enough. Um, but that it's the best that you can do. And it's like a lot of people embrace that it's the best I can do, and they really think that it will be enough. And that's another form of denial. It's like it's okay for it not to be enough. It's going to take generations of people destroying their nests before we finally get to a chance where we might begin to be stewards of our environment instead of exploiters of it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Mm. So I'd love to open to the group here, um, and just offer the space for reflections, questions, contributions. There's a couple of things that have come and gone in the chat box, something about wanting to know about sorrow and the transforming stage. And then I think you've just answered it, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that. But then I'll invite anyone who wants to offer something into the space to just put up your hand, and let's engage.
It's joy and sorrow. You get to have the entire catastrophe.
Mm. The entire catastrophe. The catastrophe of joy. I love that. Um, so let's hear. Anyone who'd like to ask, offer, reflect.
When does my new book, my book come out? Well, I have to find a publisher for it first. So if any of you happen to be an international publisher, I would love to hear from you later on. And of course, in order to get your book published, this is like down in the real world, you have to have a following. And in order to have a following, you have to have a social media presence. And in order to have a social media presence, you need to be anything else but a 9 on the Enneagram.
I mean, we've spoken a little bit about this thing, about this almost the systemic pull of the spiritual teacher archetype. And part of what you're working with in some way, the way we've spoken about it is I hear you as the hollow bone. And yet, in order for the publication to be there, it's like the opposite. You need to be quite a full bone of a spiritual teacher here instead of a hollow bone. So, I mean, what's your
So
experience of bringing this? Because you've taken other books into the world,
yeah,
but
yeah.
this requires an archetype that's
Uh,
interesting.
an archetype that's abhorrent. Okay, it's not just interesting; it's abhorrent. I think I have been in many spiritual schools and trained in several of them. And I have greatest respect for people, for 3 or 4 teachers that I've seen who I really respect as teachers. But mostly I see the trap of narcissism engulf or at least contaminate spiritual teachers. So I wouldn't be a spiritual teacher to save the world because it drags you down into a more narrow form of consciousness where I mean, I know this is ironic, where you actually think you know the answer. And here I am saying I know the answer. But there's a paradox here that's just impossible to embrace, but you have to embrace it anyway, which is like, you need to know the answer and you need to be dumb as a brick. And if you can do that, then you're fine. But the minute that you think that you are actually an authority, if somebody called me an authority on the Tao Te Ching, I'd puke, because it's like, but it's true. How's that for living both sides at the same time?
Yeah, we back to verse 41 here. Um, so opening to the floor, anyone who has a contribution, a question, a reflection.
Yeah, and I haven't been able to read the questions as they came up. So if any of those that are in the chat box, I'm glad to answer too.
Um, yeah, let's just hear. Maybe some of the people that have written some reflections in the chat box want to offer them out loud as well. There's some comments. Sing the song in your heart anyway. I think that's in relation to knowing that you're bound to fail. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you. Thank you,
Mm-hmm.
Renier. Let's just hear. Sharon.
Hello, Lucille. Hello, David, and everyone.
Hi.
So I've loved this because it's not. I haven't acquainted myself with this at all. So I'm very eager for you to get this published so that I can acquaint myself better.
Me too.
But certainly in the light of conversation and the light of your reading, one of the things that I have in my life is that I have to have hope. And for me, hope is not a conviction that something will turn out right, but that it's going to make sense to do it anyway. And
T.S. Eliot wrote, "Wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing." But the point of that poem is not to have the hope, but just to know that it's probably for the wrong thing. It's probably for some short-term thing, whereas it's the hope itself that's important, not what it's for.
yeah, and I think it's like the planting the seeds or planting the trees and knowing that you're never going to sit under them anyway.
Exactly.
But someone will.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't not do it because the earth's not going to be here anymore, so I'm not going to do this.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing passive about this stance. I mean, you definitely take all the actions that you take. You just take them with a certain bittersweet quality.
So that's my contribution.
Thank you. I like that.
Thanks. Without the heroism behind the action, I hear as well. So these are not heroic actions. It's not the hero saving the planet. It's the fool acting in some way to save the planet. I don't know if, yeah, that kind of came up for me.
I don't know how to put my hand up, so it's going
There
to
we
jump
go.
in.
Andrea, go for it.
Both of them. Yeah, just kind of, I wanted to share a bit more on this because for me, what it is the joy of, and when I say right action, I don't mean right action because it's the righteous way. It's right action because that action brings me joy, and it will bring someone joy if they get to sit under the tree, but the tree may never grow because the earth may not be here. But I have a choice, plant the tree or not plant the tree, regardless of the outcome. And my choice is to plant the damn tree because that's fun. And I get joy in that moment from that action. And that's kind of all that matters sometimes for me, is that I'm in right action or joyful action for what, because it inspires me, it gives me energy, I feel regenerated, I feel alive, I feel like there's growth, there's some sort of evolution, there's some change happening, whether it amounts to what we think it should or not, it kind of doesn't matter almost. It's, I'm full and I feel alive, and maybe that's enough. That's as far as I've gotten with it all anyway.
Yeah. There was this comic movie where this guy has all of his campers chanting this chant after they lose the big contest of "It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter." And there's something about doing things anyway, even though you know they may or may not matter, and without caring if they matter or not. Just because, like as you described, in this moment, it's the truth. It's your truth manifesting. And who knows what'll happen out of that, and who really cares, because we're going to be long dead before we find that out, whether or not that tree shades anybody.
It does not matter. Thank you, David. Alicia, and then Jim.
Thank you, Lucille. Thank you, David. I'm not even sure what my question is, but I'll try and formulate it. So the little bit, teeny weeny bit that I know about the Tao, it speaks about the way, the path, and I'm curious about your understanding of the path or the way and the relationship to the Enneagram.
Oh, great. Okay, well, just my relationship to the way is a lot like, I love the phrase that somebody once taught me: you braille your way through your life, which is like you just basically reach out and feel the textures of whatever it is, and then you kind of know what's next. And if you were blind brailing your way through life, then you really don't know what's around the next corner, but you can just do the best you can from what you know already. And I feel like the way is you braille your way down the way. You really just kind of feel what's the texture of this moment, and then what next it's calling you for. I'm really glad I'm a 9 in the Enneagram, because I think the 9 is the point where that can understand the craziness of all the rest of the points, as well as its own craziness in a less defended way. But all of those strategies are strategies of conventional maturity. And I think it's when you start stepping over the line into unconventional maturity, you can sort of see your own motivations more clearly, and how I believe we're mostly instinctual and mostly unconscious. And you begin to peer into that dark cave and see some of the things that are crawling around in there.
Thank you. I love the metaphor of the brailing.
Mm-hmm.
It really speaks to me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alicia. Jim.
About a year ago, I read Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and dove deeply into grief work. He has 5 gates of grief. And the first is everything you love, you will lose. And that's kind of a gut punch. But, you know, in accepting it and recognizing that, and that kind of speaks to your, you know, you're talking about you do it anyway. And I've just noticed in allowing grief, I'm able to have more gratitude. And yeah, and so that expansion, like you spoke of both the sorrow and the joy. So yeah, my little pitch for doing grief work. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. When I was about 25, I was driving down this road, and I'd just been reading this book called Loneliness and Love, and I thought it was really a cool book. And for some reason, I pulled over to the side of the road to read another chapter. I don't know why I was doing that, but I was 25. Who knows what and I'm reading this chapter, and I read this sentence that says, "All love ends in separation and death. My life has not been the same since then." That was like the moment where where some illusion that I had got pierced, and I was like, oh fuck, that's so true. And it's like, that's the kind of truth that is the gut punch of spiritual awakening. Yeah, I love that you said that.
Yeah, Jim, I'm also just struck by in the vision fast, in the rite of passage that David participated in the last evening. One of the invitations that some people take up and some people don't is to do a death lodge. And the practice of the death lodge is to go into a circle right through the night and to stay awake and to practice your dying and to finish, you know, whatever it is that you need to finish if you were to die in this moment. And the interesting thing about the practice of the death lodge for me has been that it enlivens us. So this thing of like the grief and the sorrow and the joy and death and life are so connected to each other. And so to practice our dying so that we can live more fully seems like it's probably a little bit of a Taoist idea here in some way, but it's a really beautiful thing. And so if we think about the larger cycle as well at this point in time of the way in which this part of civilization and this part of the species that have inhabited this planet, there's like mass extinction, there's a dying off. If we can be in the grief of that fully, we can still live fully too. And yet that's so different from the delusion that we find at this point in time, where everyone's like sleepwalking. I know, yeah.
Sleepwalking in order to avoid, like I was watching a philosopher who was talking about the deepest fear we have is our own death and unimportance. And it was like, well, it's a fear until it isn't a fear. And if we just sort of embrace it and go, oh yeah, that too, then we don't have to be defending ourselves by throwing ourselves into, you know, entertainment and addiction in order to try and get away from it. We can just go. I mean, all of these things allow us to be more present in the present moment, which is the only thing we have, and which is pretty fucking beautiful. We let ourselves experience it.
Yeah, I've noticed that when I acknowledge that things are impermanent, that I'm more willing to step into actions and opportunities, whereas before there would be this knee-jerk, unconscious no,
Yeah.
which when I investigated, it was because I was afraid of the grief that would happen.
Yeah, we're afraid of loving because if we love, we're going to lose. Yeah, hello. If we love, we're going to lose. Next. Thank you, Jim.
We have time for one or two more thoughts, contributions. Hani, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to be in such deep appreciation of the bittersweetness of this whole conversation. It's just so beautiful to be part of and to engage these paradoxes which actually are so fundamental to life. So yeah, thank you for that. And then I also just want to appreciate the contribution when you were sharing about when you are a 9, and I've got a very strong 9 in my type as well, and you're needing to get something out, because I took the route of self-publishing just recently, a children's book, and I'm stuck with all 1,000 copies in Milan. And that whole thing of like, I needed to get this out there. It's got such a fundamental message for children about the fragile planet and about our responsibility. And there was all this, absolutely, I need to do it, and I'll put my life savings in it. It's just so beautiful to have that reflected back in that way as well. You know, we need to form a group here of like, so what do we do with that stuff?
Yes,
But just
exactly.
the invitation that you've been to keep going anyway, to keep delivering what we're here to bring anyway. Because it isn't about the glory of it, and it isn't about the stuff that the systems in the world deceive us into believing it's actually about.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you very much for that. That's what I wanted to offer.
Thanks. I had to throw out cartons of books of my first mystery novel because I was sure it was going to be worth millions someday.
Renier, as a last comment, and then we'll finish off for the day.
David, I just want to say thank you very much. Just listening to you was to me such an invitation to just surrender to the unconventional. So something in me deeply moved. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a thrill to be here with you all.
So, people, in service of getting David's book published, I have one or two suggestions. The one is, please go follow David on LinkedIn. But more importantly, he has a wonderful, newly minted website out there called anarrowpath.com. And what you can do there is you can, amongst other things, sign up for a mailing list, which will not be abused, but you can also get a daily reading of the Tao, which is completely randomized. And so part of what I thought I would do is right now, I am going to go to that website and I am going to see what random reading I get, and I will read that. And then, David, maybe there's one or two things you want to say as we close off. So the reading I got today is called number 7, Service. Heaven endures, earth abides. Why are they everlasting? Because they serve selflessly. So too the wise one serves for the love of service and not just for personal gain. They do not seek fame, and so others look to them. They do not fight for survival, and so find abundance everywhere. By taking action just for the love of it, they find fulfillment. And what a beautiful way to, in some way, pull
Yeah.
together the different strands of this conversation. Yeah, for the love of it, for the love of it. And so they endure in service. Anything else from your side as we end off for today?
It's just, I love this conversation. I love being in conversations like this. It's really the only thing that's important, that we communicate heart to heart to each other.
Thank you. And so, in a way of communicating heart to heart, can I ask everyone to unmute and then to just share our blessings, our gratitude, our thank you out loud, all at the same time. So we have a cacophony of beautiful humanness coming through in this room. So unmute and let's just say our thank you all at once. Here we go.
Thank
Bless
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Gratitude.
you so
Thank you.
God bless
much.
all of you.
Appreciate.
Bye.
Bye.
So long.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
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 Sweet face.